The woman from the real estate office called me by accident. She meant to call my grandson, but she had my number written down next to his, and she got the two mixed up. And that is the only reason I found out that my house, the house I had lived in for 45 years, was going to have an open house that Saturday. She was very cheerful about it. She said, "Mrs. Healy, we've got a lot of interest already. The photos came out beautiful. That morning light in the kitchen really sells it." I sat on the edge of the bed in my room at the place my family had moved me 3 weeks earlier, and I held the phone and I said, "The morning light." And she said, "Yes, isn't it lovely?" And I said, "Yes, it is. I picked that kitchen for that light in 1979. There was a pause, and she said, "I'm sorry, who is this?" I told her, and she got off the phone very fast. So that is how I found out. But I need to take you back, because if I only tell you the part where I found out, you will think my grandchildren are monsters, and they are not. That is the hard part. That is the part that kept me up at night long after the house was safe. They were so sure they were doing the right thing that not one of them ever stopped to read what they were actually selling. My name is Margaret. People have called me Peg my whole life, but I have never liked it, and now that I am 72, I have decided I do not have to answer to it anymore. I taught 4th grade for 31 years in the same town I raised my children in. My husband was named Frank. We were married 46 years before I lost him, 3 years ago this past spring, and I will tell you about Frank because Frank is the reason this story does not end the way it was supposed to end. The house was ours from the start. We bought it in 1978 when our son David was a baby, a little brick thing on Larkspur Street with a bad roof and good bones. Frank fixed everything in it himself over the years because that was the kind of man he was. He built the back porch with his own hands the summer our daughter Katie was born. There is a doorframe in the kitchen, the one between the kitchen and the hall, where we marked the children's heights every birthday in pencil, and then later our grandchildren's. The pencil marks climb up that frame like a little ladder of everybody we ever loved. You cannot photograph that for a listing. Well, you can, but you would not know what you were looking at. Frank was particular about 2 things in this life. He was particular about his tools, every one in its place on the pegboard with a shape traced around it, and he was particular about paperwork. He did not trust anybody else to handle a document. He read every word of everything before he signed it, and he made me do the same, and it used to drive me a little crazy. We would be at the bank or the car dealership, and the man would slide the papers across, and Frank would put on his glasses and start reading, slow, top to bottom. The man would say most people just sign at the X, and Frank would say I am not most people, and he would keep reading. Read before you sign, Peg. He said it to me 1,000 times. He said it to the kids until they rolled their eyes. I did not understand then that he was not being difficult. He was being careful in a way that would reach all the way into a room he would never see 3 years after he was gone. I will give you one example of Frank. We refinanced the house once, back in the 90s, to put Katie through college. The loan officer slid a page across, and Frank stopped and read it twice. Then he looked up and said, "This says the rate can change after 2 years. You told us it was fixed." The young man started to explain it the way they do, and Frank just closed the folder, stood up, and we got a better loan down the street. In the car, he did not gloat. He said, "Quiet, they count on you being embarrassed to read it in front of them. Don't ever be embarrassed to read it in front of them." I have thought about that sentence more in the last month than I did in the last 30 years. Let me tell you how I ended up in that home, because it did not happen the way you might think. Nobody dragged me anywhere. That is what makes it sit so strangely in me even now. It started gentle. After Frank passed, I stayed in the house alone, and I was fine mostly. I am not going to pretend I was not lonely, and I am not going to pretend the stairs were not getting harder, because they were. But I had my routines. I had my garden. I had the church on Sundays and my friend Dorothy 2 doors down, until she moved to Arizona to be near her daughter. I was managing. Maybe slower than I used to, but managing. My grandson Tyler started coming around more that last year, and I want to be fair to Tyler because it would be easy not to be. Tyler is 26. He is my son David's boy, and he is a good-hearted kid in his way, and when he started coming by he really did seem to care. He would fix things. He would look at the furnace and frown and say, "Grandma, this thing is from the Clinton administration." He would stand at the bottom of the stairs and watch me come down, and I could see him counting the steps, worrying. He brought me one of those necklaces with the button you press if you fall. He set it up himself and made me promise to wear it. And then he started talking, carefully, about whether the house was too much for me. He did not say it like he wanted something. He said it like he was scared. He said, "Grandma, what happens if you fall up there at night and nobody knows for 2 days?" He had clearly thought about it a lot. He had numbers. He showed me on his phone what it cost to heat that house in the winter, what the new roof was going to run, and the figures were real. I am not saying they were not. He said there was a place over in Brookfield, real nice, where somebody was always around, where I would not have to do the stairs, where I would have people my own age and a nurse down the hall. He said it the way you would talk about sending someone on a vacation. At one point he waved his hand and said, "And don't you worry about any of the paperwork, Grandma. I'll handle all that. You don't need to read all that boring stuff." He meant it kindly. He meant he would spare me a chore. But it landed strange on my ear, and I did not understand why until later. Frank never once in 46 years called paperwork boring or offered to spare anybody from reading it. Frank thought the paperwork was the whole thing. A small voice in the back of my mind said, "That is a funny thing for somebody to want to handle for you." I did not listen to the voice. There was another moment, smaller, that I only see now for what it was. He was looking around my kitchen while he talked, and he said, "You know, we'll probably repaint in here. This yellow is pretty dated." Not you should. Not somebody might. Will. He did not even notice he had said it. But the house had already changed hands in his head weeks before, and the words slipped out and told me so. I heard it and let it go by because I did not want to know what it meant. I want you to understand that I sat at my own kitchen table and listened to my grandson lay all this out, and a part of me thought, maybe he is right. Maybe I am being stubborn. Maybe the loneliest thing I do all week is talk to a checkout girl at the Kroger, and maybe a place with people would be better. He was not wrong about the stairs. He was not wrong about the roof. When somebody who loves you sits across from you and lays out every reasonable thing, it is very hard to be the one who says no out of nothing but a feeling. The feeling does not have numbers. The feeling just has a pencil ladder on a doorframe that nobody else can see. Frank would have known what to say. Frank would have looked at Tyler's numbers and read them slow, top to bottom, and found the thing nobody else was looking at. But Frank was gone, and I was tired, and I told Tyler I would think about it. And thinking about it, with all of them gently pushing in the same direction, turned out to be the same as saying yes. David came by too, my son, and this is the part one have the hardest time with, so let me just say it plain. I have spent 3 weeks telling myself that David got talked into it by his kids, that he was swept along, that he is weak but not unkind. I wanted that to be true. But David sat in my living room, and he did not talk about stairs or furnaces. He said, "Mom," and he could not quite look at me. He said, "The thing is, the money from the house would really make a difference for us right now. Susan and I are stretched pretty thin. And the place in Brookfield, they take most of what you'd get from the sale, but it's covered, you'd be taken care of, and we'd have a little breathing room." He said it almost with relief, like he had been wanting to say it for months. "I already talked to the man at Brookfield," he said. "I put down the deposit." He had already put down the deposit. Before he ever asked me. My son had done the arithmetic on my home and on his own troubles, and he had decided, and the asking was just a formality he was getting through. That was not Tyler. That was David. A father makes a choice like that himself. Nobody makes it for him. So I went. I let them pack me up. I told myself it was temporary, just for a little while, just to try it, and I think I even believed it, or I made myself believe it, because the other thing to believe was too much to carry. Tyler drove me over to Brookfield on a Tuesday with 2 suitcases and a box of photographs, and he was so kind that day. He carried everything. He made my bed, he set up my photos on the dresser, and he hugged me hard before he left and said, "This is going to be good, Grandma, you'll see." And he meant it. That is the thing I cannot get past. He meant every word of it. The home was not a bad place. I want to be honest about that. The people who worked there were mostly kind, especially a young woman named Rosa who did the evening rounds and always stopped to actually talk to me. The food was fine. My room was clean. If I had chosen it myself, if it had been my own decision made in my own time, I might even have come around to it. The thing that got me was the small loss of small choices. At home I ate when I was hungry, sometimes 9 at night and sometimes not at all. At Brookfield, supper was at 5, because that was when the kitchen ran, and by 8, when I was actually hungry, there was nothing but a cup of decaf and a cracker. Nobody was unkind about it. It was just that 100 little decisions that had been mine for 50 years were now made by a schedule, and together they added up to a person being quietly informed that her preferences were no longer the point. I was safe. I was fed. I was warm. And I would have given a year of it for one night in my own kitchen with the bad furnace and the morning light. But within the first week, I started to notice that my things were disappearing from the house. Not from my room, from the house. Tyler would mention, in passing, that they had cleared out the garage, that they had donated Frank's workbench because nobody was using it. I want to stop on the workbench for a moment, because that is where I should have stopped them and did not. Frank built that bench in 1981. Above it, he hung a sheet of pegboard, and over the years, one tool at a time, he traced the outline of every wrench and pliers and hammer in black marker, so that an empty space would tell you at a glance what was missing and where it belonged. The grandchildren used to ask him why he did that, why he bothered, and he never really had an answer that satisfied them. He would just say, "So I know it's gone. So I know it's gone." He traced the shape of a thing so its absence would have a shape too. Nobody else ever understood why he did it. I am not sure I fully understood it myself until I was standing in a clean little room in Brookfield being told the bench was gone. They donated the tools. And then Tyler told me, like it was nothing, that they had thrown the board out, the pegboard, because you could not donate a sheet of old pegboard. Who would want it? So all those traced outlines, every shape Frank drew so he would know what was missing, went into a dumpster. I said, "You gave away your grandfather's tools," and Tyler said, "Grandma, they were just sitting there rusting. Somebody might as well use them." And he was not being cruel. He genuinely could not see it. To him it was a garage full of old metal and a dirty board with marker on it. To me it was the last place Frank's hands had been, and a wall that still held the shape of everything he ever reached for. That is the point where the temporary started to feel permanent. You do not clear out a garage and donate a man's workbench for a 2-week trial. I started to understand that in their minds this was already done. The house was already sold in every way except the paperwork. They had moved me out of the way first, gently, lovingly, so that the hard part would be easier, and now they were simply tidying up what was left behind. And what they were tidying up was 45 years of my life. I met Eleanor in the dining room my second week. She was sitting alone by the window, and she waved me over with a kind of authority, like she had decided we were going to be friends, and that was that. She was 79, sharp as a tack, with a voice like gravel from 60 years of cigarettes. She had finally quit too late to get the voice back. We got to talking, the way you do, and at some point I told her a little of how I had ended up there. She listened to the whole thing with her eyes narrowing, and when I finished, she did not say "I'm sorry, dear," the way the others did. She said, "Let me guess. The house is already up for sale." I said I did not know. I said they had not told me anything about selling, just about the move. And Eleanor laughed, not unkindly, a dry little laugh, and she said, "Oh, honey," she said, "sit down. Let me tell you how this goes, because I have already been where you are standing." Eleanor had had a house too, a bigger one than mine, out in the country, where she and her husband raised 4 children. When her husband passed, her oldest son invited her to come stay with his family for a while, just while she got her feet under her, just for a little while, and she went, because that is what you do, you trust your children. And while she was staying in her son's guest room, being told what a help it was to have her there, her son sold her house. He had the authority to do it because somewhere in the fog of those first months after her husband passed, she had signed something he put in front of her. Some paper he said was just for taxes, just to make things easier. She did not read it. She was grieving and she trusted him and she signed at the X. And it turned out to be the thing that let him sell the house out from under her. By the time she understood what had happened, the house was gone, and there was nothing anybody could do because she had signed it away herself. She told me this in a flat voice, looking out the window, and at the end of it she said, "I never got it back. I never even got to walk through it one more time. They had it cleaned out and sold in 6 weeks." She turned and looked at me then, and she said the thing that changed everything, although neither of us knew it yet. She said, "Whose name is actually on your house, Margaret? Did you ever once go look? Or did you just trust that you knew?" And I opened my mouth to say, of course it's my name, it's my house, and I stopped. Because I did not actually know. Frank had handled all of that. Frank handled the deed and the will and the trust and all of it in his careful way, with his glasses on, reading every word, and I had never once looked at the actual papers, because Frank had taken care of it, and Frank always took care of it right. Read before you sign, Peg. I sat there in that dining room, and I heard his voice so clearly it was like he was in the chair next to me. I thought about how he was particular about exactly 2 things, his tools and his paperwork, and how he used to say, more than once, in that quiet way he had when he was telling me something that mattered, "I've set things up so nobody can ever push you around." Peg. I had thought he meant the savings. I had thought it was just a thing men of his generation said. But Frank did not say things just to say them. Frank measured twice and cut once and read every word before he signed. I needed to find out what Frank had actually done. There was a man named James Okafor who had been Frank's friend for 40 years, a lawyer, retired now, who had done all our legal work back when he was practicing. Frank trusted him the way he trusted almost nobody. I still had his number in the little address book I had brought with me, Frank's handwriting on the page. I called him from the phone in the hall, and when he heard my voice, he was so glad. Then he heard why I was calling, and he got very quiet, and he said, "Margaret, can you have someone bring you to my office?" Bring nothing. I have everything. Frank made sure I had everything. My granddaughter Ashley took me. Ashley is Tyler's older sister, 28, and of all of them, she was the one who had seemed uneasy about the whole thing from the start. She never said anything against it, she went along, but she would not quite meet my eyes. And when I asked her to drive me to an appointment and to please not mention it to her brother or her father, she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Okay, Grandma. Just okay." I think some part of her had been waiting for somebody to ask her to do something other than go along. James Okafor's office was in his house now that he was retired, a sunroom with 2 chairs and a wall of filing cabinets, and he had a folder already out on the table when we got there, a thick one, soft at the corners, with Frank's name on the tab in Frank's own block letters. He put on his glasses, and the gesture was so much like Frank that I had to look away for a second. He explained it the way you would to someone who needed to actually understand. He said, "Margaret, about a year before Frank passed, he came to me and said he wanted to make sure that no matter who decided what after he was gone, you could never lose this house. Not to a bad year, not to a hospital bill, not to anybody's good intentions." Those were Frank's words. James remembered them. not even to somebody's good intentions. So Frank had set it up so the house was held in a trust, with me in control of it for the rest of my life, and so that I had the legal right to live there until I passed, a right nobody could sell or sign away but me. The children and grandchildren were named to inherit it, but only after I was gone. While I was alive, not one of them had any say over it. Not David. Not Tyler. Nobody. I said, but they listed it. They have an open house on Saturday. They have photographs of my kitchen on the internet. And James took off his glasses and said, "Gently, Margaret, they can photograph it all they like. They cannot sell it. They never could." The first thing any buyer's lawyer does is check who actually owns the place, and the second they do, the whole thing stops cold, because the only person who can sign this house away is you. He almost smiled. He said, "They have been planning the sale of something that was never theirs to sell. They didn't read the deed. If any one of them had read a single page of it, they would have known none of this was possible." I sat in that sunroom and I felt a great many things at once, and not one of them was triumph, which surprised me. I had expected to feel like I had won something. Instead, I felt the strangest grief, because what it meant was that Frank had known. Not known what would happen, he could not have known the specifics. But he had known his own family well enough, known the shape of how things go, to understand that someday somebody might decide they knew better than I did what was good for me. And he had quietly, carefully, with his glasses on, built a wall around me that I would not even know was there until the day I walked into it backwards and found it holding. He protected me from our own children. And he did it without ever telling me in a way that would have made me worry, because that was Frank too. He just said, "I've set things up so nobody can ever push you around." And then he made sure it was true, down at the county, in writing, read twice, and signed once. I did not go in with lawyers. I want to tell you that part because I think it matters. I had every right to be furious, and a piece of me was, but the bigger piece of me had spent 31 years teaching 9-year-olds, and I know the difference between a child who is bad and a child who is wrong. My family was wrong, not bad. So I did not send James Okafor after them. I asked Ashley to drive me to the house on Saturday morning, before the open house, and to call her father and her brother, and tell them only that I needed to see everyone at the house at 9 o'clock. Not why. They were already there when we pulled up, because they were setting up for the showing, putting out little signs. There was a vase of flowers on my kitchen counter that no one in my family had ever bought in their lives. Staging flowers, and the sight of those flowers on Frank's kitchen counter did something to me that the whole rest of it had not quite done. But I held it. I went in, and they all turned, surprised, David and Tyler and Susan, and Tyler said, "Grandma, what are you? How did you? You shouldn't be here. The showing is at 10. I put my purse on the counter, next to the flowers, and I took out the folder James Okafor had copied for me, and I set it on the kitchen table, right under the doorframe with the pencil marks, and I said, "Sit down. All of you." And something in my voice, something they had not heard from me in a long time, maybe ever, made them sit. I did not yell. I told them I knew about the listing. I told them I had been to see James Okafor. And then I opened the folder and I told them, in plain words, what their grandfather had done, what was recorded at the county, what would show the instant a buyer's lawyer looked at it. I watched it land on each of them differently, and I will remember their 3 faces for the rest of my life. Susan understood first, and she went very pale and very quiet, and she put her hand over her mouth, because she was the one who knew exactly what it meant for the breathing room they had been counting on, the deposit, the plans. David could not look at the folder and could not look at me. He looked at the table, at the pencil marks climbing the door frame just past my shoulder, and his face did something complicated and awful, and I understood that he was not just realizing the house could not be sold. He was realizing that his father, who had been gone 3 years, had seen this coming. That Frank had looked down the road and known his own son might do this, and had built a wall to stop him. There is no harder thing for a man than to find out his late father did not trust him, and to find out he was right not to. David did not say anything. He just put his face in his hand. And Tyler did not understand at first that he had done anything wrong. That is the part one need you to hear, because it is the truest part. He said, "Grandma, this wasn't. We were trying to help you. We were worried about you. You can't do those stairs. The house is falling apart. We were trying to protect you." I let that sit for a second. And then I asked him one question, quietly, not as an attack, just because I wanted to watch him try to answer it. I said, "Then why did you wait until after I moved out to list the house?" He opened his mouth, and nothing came. Because there is no version of trying to protect somebody that requires you to get them out of the building before you put it up for sale. He knew at the moment the question was in the air. I watched it reach him slowly, the first crack in the only story he had let himself believe, and he looked at me and he did not have a single word. And that silence was the closest he came, that whole morning, to understanding what he had done. And the terrible thing is that even then he believed the rest of it, every word, even with the folder open on the table. He had told himself the story so many times that it had become the only story he could see. He had never once, in all his worrying about the furnace and the stairs and the roof, asked me what the house was. He had solved a problem I did not ask him to solve, and in solving it he had tried to sell the one thing on earth that still had his grandfather's hands all over it, and he could not understand why I was not grateful. I said, "Tyler." I said it the way I used to say a child's name in my classroom when I needed them to actually stop and hear me. I said, "You never asked me. Not one of you ever asked me what this house was. You decided what was good for me and you moved me out of the way to do it, and you were so busy being sure you were right that you tried to sell a house you did not even own. And you didn't read the deed. Your grandfather spent his whole life saying read before you sign, and not one of you read a single page." Ashley was crying by then, quiet, in the corner by the refrigerator, and she said, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I knew something was wrong. I should have said something. And I told her, you drove me. When it counted, you drove me. I have not forgotten that, and I will not." There was no beautiful reconciliation. I want to be honest with you the way I have tried to be honest the whole way through. David tried to apologize and it came out wrong. It came out as "I'm sorry, Mom. We should have talked about it more," which is the apology of a man who still thinks the only mistake was the process. Susan did not apologize at all. She gathered up the little open house signs with her mouth in a hard line, and I have not heard from her since, and I do not expect to. Tyler left without really understanding, his face red, humiliated, which is not the same as sorry, and I knew it was not the same, and I let him go anyway, because you cannot force a person to understand a thing they are not ready to see. Maybe he will get there in 10 years. Maybe he will be standing in his own kitchen someday, and it will finally land. Maybe not. I had the locks changed that afternoon, and I moved back into my house, and the first thing I did was call Brookfield and tell them I would not be coming back. The second thing I did was throw those staging flowers in the trash and put Frank's old coffee can of pennies back on the windowsill where it belonged. It is not the same as it was. I will not tell you it is. Something happened in that kitchen that cannot be unhappened. I look at my son differently now, and that is a quiet grief I will carry, because I gave that boy everything and I found out what he would do when he was stretched thin and thought I would not notice. I see him sometimes. He comes by, we are polite, and under the politeness there is something that will not fully heal, and I have made my peace with the fact that it will not. But Ashley comes by for real. She comes on Sundays and we do the garden, and she has started asking me about Frank, about how he was, about the early days in this house, and I tell her, and I am teaching her, without quite saying so, to be a person who reads before she signs. And Eleanor. Eleanor never got her house back, and she never will, and there is no document in any filing cabinet that can give it to her. So I asked her to come live in mine. There is plenty of room, more than one old woman needs, and the stairs are easier with somebody else in the house, and we are two women who were each supposed to be moved quietly out of the way, and only one of us had a Frank. She moved into Katie's old room in the spring. She put her own pictures on the wall. Some afternoons we sit on the back porch that Frank built with his own hands the summer my daughter was born, and we do not say much, and that is fine. There is a door frame in my kitchen with pencil marks climbing up it. Every child and grandchild I ever loved, measured on their birthdays going back to 1979. Last week I stood Eleanor against it, and I made a mark for her, at the top, higher than all of them, and I wrote her name and the date, and she laughed her gravel laugh, and said she had not been measured for height since Eisenhower. And I made a mark for myself too, right next to hers. 72 years old. Still here. Still standing in my own kitchen. In the morning light I picked out in 1979. The light that sells the house that was never for sale. I ran my fingers over the old marks before I went to bed that night, the way you would read something written in a language only you still speak. Frank's handwriting next to each one, the dates, the little careful numbers. Every mark was still there. Every single one. They almost sold the house. They went so far as to put flowers on the counter and pictures on the internet. They just never understood that you cannot sell the house out from under life. The walls, maybe. Never the life inside them.